In today's video, we're gonna look at sharpening in Luminar NEO. We're gonna start by looking at the definition of sharpening so we understand what it does to our images. After that, we look at all the available tools in Luminar NEO that can help us with sharpening. And after that, I will show you when and why should you sharpen your photos during your photo editing process. Okay, so starting from the beginning, let's talk about a very basic definition of sharpening. Sharpening in photo editing enhances the clarity and crispness of an image by increasing the contrast along the edges. Talking about enhancing the details, when you sharpen an image, you are essentially making the edges of objects or subjects within the photo appear clearer and more defined. This can help bring out fine details that may have been softened during the image capture process or due to resizing. At this point, it's important to mention that the traditional sharpening we're talking about today is not meant to help you to recover blurry or soft images. For this type of recovery, you need another tools like the Supersharp AI, which is also available in Luminar NEO, however, that uses completely different technique. If you are indeed interested in the Supersharp AI, we have a full tutorial on how to use that already on our YouTube channel, and I will make sure that I will link it in a corner of the video right now. But now moving with our definition and looking at the edge contrast. Because remember, when it comes to sharpening, you increasing the contrast along the edges of the subject or object. So coming back to our edge contrast, sharpening increases the contrast along the edges in the image. What it means is that the dark pixels next to the light pixels become darker, and the light pixels next to the dark pixels become lighter. Now what it means that this increased contrast along the edges make them appear sharper. Now when it comes to adjusting the controls, most photo editing software offers various controls for sharpening. In Luminar NEO, those are Sharpen, Radius, and Masking. Now the Sharpen slider determines the strength of the sharpening effect. So basically, depending on how you set the Sharpen slider, that's the amount of contrast you will add between the light and dark pixels. Then we have the Radius. The Radius slider determines how many pixels around each edge will be affected. And finally, the Masking slider helps us to specify the minimum brightness difference that will be sharpened. Pixels with smaller differences won't be affected, and that will help us to reduce the noise in areas with smooth transitions. What it basically means that the sharpening will only sharpen the areas with the texture and edges. On the top of the three controllers I just mentioned, Luminar NEO also has the Details tool. Now the Details tool uses a similar method as the sharpening. However, rather than looking at the individual pixels, the Details slider looks at the image and search for groups of similar pixels and then sharpen them in groups, enhancing the sharpness and details for small, medium, or large objects. Okay, so we are finished with the definition of sharpening, and now we know exactly what does the traditional sharpening do to our images. So now it's time to move into Luminar NEO and look at the tools we have available for the sharpening itself. So as you can see, I'm in Edit module, I have a sample file ready, and now we're gonna turn our attention towards our toolbar. The first place we need to go to is the Develop tool. Depending on the image you're editing, it may be also Develop Raw. However, when you click on it and open it, and when you open the sharpness bar, the selection and option here will be same for both of the tools. So with the Sharpen slider, when you increase it one more time, you're increasing the contrast between the individual pixels. After that, we have the radius slider, which helps us to determine how many pixels around each edge will be affected. And finally, the masking. This is a slider which can help us to make sure that we only sharpening the areas that have a texture or edge. So on this example right here, by increasing the masking, usually to somewhere around 60 or 70, you will only be sharpening the house and also the landscape. So you will not be sharpening the sky and some of the foreground right here. So the develop tool, the sharpness tab, this is where you have the ultimate control over the sharpening on your image. Now let's close the develop tool and continue moving into the details tool. In the details tool, you have the three options for the details, so small, medium, and large. And you also have the sharpen slider. And when you open the sharpening masking, you will find the same radius and masking. So really, if you would want to, you could do the sharpening from here using the sharpen slider and then the sharpening masking options. However, the main reason why you come into the details tool is to enhance the details. So again, as I mentioned earlier, the difference between using the sharpen slider and the details slider is that the details tool scans the image and look for pixels that are similar to each other, and then depending on their size, small, medium, or large, then they increase the contrast between the whole bunch of pixels and the rest of the image. So let me show you, for example, the medium details. When we increase it, when we push it a lot, it really works a lot on the grass and some part of the house. Where with the small details, when we increase it, it much more focuses on the stones and the little details on the roof. The small details is almost similar to the sharpening. Not exactly the same, but very similar. And finally, the large details, when we also increase it, that slider is focusing on the largest parts of these pixels that are together, means that it enhancing the largest details on the image. One more interesting thing to note is the details masking, which works exactly the same way as the sharpening, and basically you just use the details masking slider, adjust it to somewhere around 60 or 70, and that way you make sure that you're not adding details into the areas that have no textures or details on it. So this is the details tab. You have the sharpen slider and also option to adjust the details depending on their size. Finally, there is one more tool where you can adjust the sharpening, and that's the Noiseless AI. So for that, we need to go into the extensions because the Noiseless AI is an extension, and open it. Once we open the Noiseless AI, you will notice the three different presets for the noise reduction on the top, and then three sliders. We have the luminosity denoise, details, and sharpness. And the details and sharpness sliders works pretty much the same way as the details and sharpness in the details tool. The only difference for the details is that you can't choose between small, medium, and large. And what it does, it basically adjusts the details in general. So an average of the details on the image. And again, the reason why two of these sliders are here is that when you apply noise reduction to the image, often you lose some details during the process. So to be able to recover them and enhance some of the sharpness back, you have the option to use the sliders here. Now in past, I was often asked what is the difference between the sharpness slider here, sharpness slider in the details, and sharpness slider in the develop tool. And the true answer is that there is no difference at all. The reason why they are in three different locations is just to make the easier access. However, each of these sliders will do exactly the same, and that's to increase the contrast between the individual pixels. So if you would really want to push it, you could increase the sharpness slider on three different tools, and when you look at it, the sharpness has 100%, so 100% of the sharpness, and if you would apply it in develop, details and noiseless AI, you would add 300 of sharpening to your image, which is almost like adding 300% of a contrast to these edges of the pixels. So it doesn't really matter where you're gonna apply it from, as long as you keep an eye on your image and make sure that you don't over sharpen it. And now to finish this part of the tutorial, we also have to mention the Supersharp AI Extension. Just like the Noiseless AI, it's located in an Extension tab, so here we can just click on it and open it. Already looking at the controllers, you can see that it works very differently compared to the traditional sharpening method. And so since we're here, let's talk about what you would use this tool for. The Supersharp AI is designed to refine the blur on an object outlines caused by movement, misfocus, or shaky camera. So it basically uses the AI learning and try to save images where there is something technically wrong. Maybe the camera moved, you missed the focus, something is wrong with that. Where the traditional method, with all the sliders we've been looking at, is really here just to enhance the clarity and crispness of an image. So where both of the methods are dealing with sharpness, both of them are for very much different purposes and use different techniques. And talking about photo editing workflow, you would apply some sort of sharpening on all images, where the Supersharp AI is here really for very specific tasks. Now, just before we're going to continue, a quick reminder about our best-selling Luminar NEO Power Bundle. Right now, just for $39, you can get over 986 new elements to power up your favorite Luminar NEO tools. You will get an incredible high-definition skies, overlays, textures, backgrounds, working layers, LUTs, and presets to really transform your images with only few clicks. Now, to get the best possible price, you can follow the link in the description of this video, or you can find out more about it on our website, cleverphotographer.com. And now it's time for the third and final part of this tutorial, where we're gonna talk about when and why to sharpen your images. Now, in general, there are three types of sharpening made at different parts of your editing workflow. The first one is called capture sharpening. This is the sharpening which should be applied early in the editing process to compensate for the softness introduced during image capture. After that, we have the creative sharpening. This sharpening can be applied at any point of the photo editing process, really depending on the situation and on the photo editing. Quite often, this sharpening is also applied locally or selectively. For example, like on this image, just to the mountain in the foreground, or maybe to the portrait, to the subject, and so on. So that's the creative sharpening. And finally, then we have the output sharpening. This sharpening is often applied before printing or before displaying the image to compensate for the softening effect of the output medium. Let's start with the capture sharpening. One more time, this sharpening is applied early in the editing process. Now, when exactly you're going to apply it will depend on the format of the image. If you're editing a RAW file, it will be one of the very first things you're going to do. Where if you're going to be editing any other file like JPEG or PNG or TIFF, you can do it a little bit later. Now let me explain you. First of all, we have a RAW file in front of us, so let's open the Develop RAW tool. And we have to remember that often sharpening and noise reduction is done at the same time. And the reason is when you apply sharpness, it naturally enhances and bring out additional noise. Where in opposite, when you apply noise reduction, and often the luminosity noise reduction, it will remove the sharpness. So you have to find a right balance between these two. And since we're talking about details, The best strategy for this is to use as much data as possible, which is only at the beginning of the editing. Once you start to apply additional things, additional effects, maybe start to tweak the colors, you will lose the quality and the details, and you will be sharpening much less data. This is why many photographers start with the sharpening as one of the first steps here in the Develop Raw tool. So that's the capture sharpening for raw files. Where for the JPEGs and other images, so let's say this is JPEG, you can, for example, go ahead and use the Enhance AI, maybe improve the image a little bit, then maybe apply a little bit of warmth through the landscape tool, and only after you can then return into the develop tool and adjust your sharpness and noise reduction. And the reason why for the JPEGs and the other formats you don't have to do it right at the beginning is that it's already a smaller file, there is already a reduction on the data you're going to work with, so it's not as urgent. However, as a rule of thumb, you really want to do it before you move into the creative, portrait or professional part of your toolbar. When it comes to the capture sharpening or the initial sharpening, that is also the time when you would use the Supersharp AI, because you want to do all the edit only after the image is fixed. So if it was little soft or blurry, fix it first with the Supersharp AI and then continue with the other tools. Now moving to the creative sharpening, which again can be applied at any point of your photo editing process. Now some images don't need this sharpening at all and some do. It really depends. However, let me show you two examples on when I would use the creative sharpening on my images. The first example uses the selective or local adjustment. And why are we gonna do this? Well, we're gonna apply sharpening to the mountain and the chapel, which is our main subject on this image. And by applying sharpening to the mountain and leaving the rest of the image the way it is, we're gonna create a visual contrast. And by doing that, we're gonna attract the viewer eyes towards our main subject. So basically, we're gonna attract the attention. So let's do that. What we're gonna use for this example is the details tool. So let's open it. And in fact, we can actually use a little bit of the details. So let's go ahead and increase the small details, maybe also the medium details, somewhere around 10, and a little bit of sharpening, maybe just somewhere around 20. At this moment, it's applied to the entire image, so it's not really doing what we need. So now we need to use masking. Let's go ahead and click on the masking tab, and we can use any of the options here, but for this example, we're gonna use a simple brush. So let's select the brush. Let's make sure that we are on paint. Let's have a look with the size. We're gonna go quite high, somewhere around 240. We can leave the softness on 100 and strength on 100. In fact, let's just bring it down to 80. After this, very quickly, we're just gonna brush over the area we wanna sharpen. So again, that's our mountain right here. Nice and fast, just brushing over these areas. The nice thing with the sharpness is that you don't have to be super precise. If you go a little bit over, it's not the end of the world. So something like this. Then, of course, that we can zoom in a little closer to make sure that we sharpen only the chapel. So let's adjust the size of our brush. Brush over this area here. And that's pretty much it. Now let's zoom out and check out the before and after. And actually, I'm not sure how much you can see it on your screen, because the difference is quite subtle. But that's the key with all the local adjustments. You don't want them to be too visible. You want them to be subtle and work all together to help you to guide the viewer eyes and add more attention towards the specific parts of the image you want to highlight. So this is the first use. This is how you use the sharpening locally. So let's go ahead, reset this, and let's come back. Now moving to the second example of the creative sharpening, and in this case, the goal is to recover some of the sharpening after you apply tools like Mystical Tool, Glow Tool, or other creative tools which naturally remove the sharpness from the image. So a great example is the mystical tool, which I love to use, especially on a sunset or sunrise images, because I think it really works quite well. However, when you apply a lot of it, let's say somewhere around 40, you will remove some sharpness from your photo. So once you finish editing with the mystical tool, the easiest thing is to jump back into the develop tool, open the sharpness tab, and then just bring back some sharpness. Usually somewhere around 20 or 30 will do the magic. After that, just close it and continue. And finally, we're gonna finish with the output sharpening. This sharpening is applied just before printing, displaying, or exporting to compensate for softening effect of the output media. This can be on paper or on screen. In Luminar NEO, there are two ways to do this. One where you have more control over how much you're gonna sharpen your image, and one quite automatic. So the first one is exactly the same as I showed you earlier. When you finish with the full edit, just jump into the develop tool, use the sharpness tab and add extra sharpening. Now, how much you're gonna add will very much depend on what you're gonna export the image for. For example, for printing, and especially for printing in a large size, you want to add somewhere around 20 to 50 on sharpening. Where for exporting, for display, for example for website or social media, you maybe don't have to add any sharpening at all. However, I think somewhere around 10 or 15 before you export the image always does the job. Now, if you don't want to do this, let's just reset the develop tool, close it, and when you're gonna export the image, in the exporting settings, you will see that there is an option to sharpen. The options here are low, medium, or high. Now you need to do some testing here to see how much of the sharpening is applied. However, one more time, the general advice is to choose the medium. But if I have to choose between using the automatic sharpening or have the full control on how much I'm gonna sharpen the image using the develop tool, I would probably go for the option where I have more control. And there you have it. So now you know what the sharpening is, what it does to your images, what are the tools in Luminar NEO that you can use for sharpening, and on the top of it, you also know when and why to apply a different sharpening during the photo editing process. And that's it for today. If you have any questions about today's tutorial or Luminar NEO in overall, then make sure that you write them in the comment section under this video. If you did enjoy today's tutorial, then please go ahead and like and share it. And also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any of our future content. For today, thank you very much for watching, and I already can't wait to see you in the next video.